Great reporting as always, Anthony. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. But right now, let's talk a little bit about Edmund Zagorski, who you just heard about. And to help me break down this case, I'm joined by a very special guest, Law and Crime trial analyst, Yosha Gunasekera. Yosha, great to see you.
It's great to be here, as always.
So the idea that this guy was able to convince a court to stay the execution, this is only temporary. What's the chances that he may have an successful appeal? I mean, what are his chances of moving forward here? He's saying that he didn't have adequate representation. He's saying to change the execution method. What are his options moving forward?
Well, in these type of cases, when you're on the eve of execution, his lawyers are going to try to do everything to stall. They're going to try to do everything to buy themselves a little bit more time. And so here, he's allowed to choose his execution. Technically, you're supposed to give 2 weeks' notice, which is why the state said it's not adequate notice here. But the circuit court said we have to explore the argument that his lawyers have presented.
So he said that lethal injection is cruel and unusual punishment. Now, I am not an expert here, but wouldn't the electric chair be a worse option for him? That's what he's asking for? What am I not getting here?
I definitely would agree there. We've heard some really horrible stories about inmates who have been electrocuted via the electric chair. There's burning flesh. It's awful. So, yes, that would be cruel and unusual, I think, by any other means. I think that would be cruel and unusual in our perspective. But I think the issue here is all about slowing things down, because remember, they're still challenging the adequate legal representation. And so his attorneys are throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks.
The best case scenario for him is that, he'd get a new trial?
That is a possibility, but I think what's more likely, it's very hard to win these claims of ineffective legal counsel. There's a very high standard, so I think likely what's going to happen is he's going to get his choice of execution, which is the electric chair. I think that's unfortunately the expected outcome here.
And then what happens? Does that get put off for a few years? Does it happen next week? I mean, what are these situations? I think a lot of people are surprised when somebody's in death row how long it takes for them to actually be executed.
It takes years because there's so many appeals, and that's what we're seeing here. But the execution could happen at any time once they've heard the argument on the merits, once they've heard the lawyer's argument about the electric chair, once they've determined that the execution could go forward.
What's interesting is when you read about this guy, they say he's a model prisoner, that people seem to like him in the prison, and that, if anything, incarceration has helped him repent for his sins. But is this all salad dressing? Is this all nonsense?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because he has been sentenced to death. There are victims in this case. People were brutally murdered. And so it's a tough situation, for sure.
It's a tough situation all around. All right, we'll let you know if there's any update in that case. And again, you can go to lawandcrime.com. But let's switch gears here and talk about our main live trial of the day, and that is the Tammy case. Now, in case you didn't see it, yesterday was Cell Phone Records Day. We tried to understand the communications between Heather Elvis and Sydney Moorer right before her disappearance. Officer Jonathan Martin from the Horry County Police Department took the stand and explained it a little bit more. Okay, so that's some testimony from yesterday that you might have missed. This is a Detective Jonathan Martin talking about the phone records. And again, we're trying to understand the conversations between this missing victim, Heather Elvis, and Sydney Moorer, the man who it's claimed she was having an affair with. Now, Yosha, when we look at these phone records and her trying to call this payphone, it seems suspicious, but how does a jury separate between, okay, this is suspicious because this guy's having an affair, and this is suspicious because he and maybe his wife had something to do with her disappearance?
So cell phone data and phone data in general is always very difficult because the defense is going to argue, look, this is tracking a cell phone. It's not necessarily tracking a person. It's tracking a payphone. And it's just an imprecise science. The prosecution is trying to take data and fit it into their theory of things. Yes, Sydney had an affair, but with all these allegations of this open marriage, the defense is really trying to chip away at the possible motive here.
Okay, let's play a little bit more from Jonathan Martin. Again, this detective who's called on the stand to talk about these cell phone records, and maybe we can learn a little bit more of the timeline of events.
I did.
Okay, let's break this down a little bit more. Yosha, anybody that uses a payphone, and while we're talking about 2013, is it a little suspicious in today's day and age when everybody has cell phones?
It definitely looks suspicious and odd. Frankly, I haven't actually seen a payphone in New York City in years. So it does look a little suspicious. It does look odd. But here we know that Sydney and Miss Elvis, they had a relationship. So the fact that he's calling her in itself might not be suspicious. Now they're trying to create a picture that there was repeated phone calls, that there was something frenetic going on, but it's not odd that they would have been talking together considering they had a former intimate relationship.
Would you call this a circumstantial evidence case? Yes, right?
Yes, definitely.
So the idea that there's evidence that he went to a Walmart to buy this pregnancy test, right? And if she's pregnant and then automatically disappears, never heard from again, we're trying to track her cell phone location, and to the last time I think she was trying to get a hold of Sydney Moore, you're starting to see the narrative that the prosecution's putting forth, right?
Of course, and the prosecution is pursuing this case because there is a strong motive. We've seen Tammy's Facebook post calling Miss Elvis horrible, horrible things on Facebook. There was a love triangle. There's a lot going on here and a lot to break down. It's almost like a Lifetime movie. So there really is a motive, but the issue is you can't win a case on motive alone. They have to be able to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And right now, I'm just not seeing the evidence.
All right, well, there's a lot to talk about in this case, but we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about those cell phone records. Stay tuned. Okay, so let's talk about what the defense is trying to do here. Yosha, what is the defense trying to get at here with the idea of her keep on calling this payphone?
I think they're trying to make the larger point that you really can't create the picture exactly as it happened. For example, the beginning line of questioning by the defense attorney was, you don't know if Heather Elvis called the payphone on a different cell phone. So what I think they're trying to do is break the narrative and say it's not exactly the data that you presented because Sydney could have used his cell phone. He could have used the payphone. She could have used her own cell phone. She could have used someone else's cell phone. So it's not necessarily what the prosecution is presenting is the full picture.
Do the evidence that we presented so far about her cell phone records and maybe her location, do you think that's been compelling evidence?
I think it's going to be the crux of the prosecution's case. I think because this is circumstantial, they're going to rely very heavily on it, but the defense is likely going to have their own experts to say that this data, again, is very imprecise.
How likely is it to successfully prosecute a case where you don't have a body in a kidnapping case like this?
I think it's unlikely, and I think the fact that they were unable to convict Sydney on the similar kidnapping charges speaks volumes to what's going to happen for Tammy's case.
Right. He was tried for kidnapping himself. That was ended in a mistrial. It's unclear if they're going to move forward with another trial, but he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for obstruction of justice for trying to stall this case. It was pretty incredible stuff, what we're talking about with the Moores. And we are going to be live in that courtroom today. So this weird dynamic, this weird saga is going to continue. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. An aspiring model in Georgia was pronounced brain dead after being shot in the neck and causing a 3-car accident while driving in Clayton County. 28-year-old Kelsey Quayle reportedly lost control of her car and drove into oncoming traffic after being shot in the neck by an unknown suspect. Quayle had recently moved to the Atlanta area to pursue modeling opportunities. The other drivers in the crash only suffered minor injuries. Authorities are now looking through surveillance footage for more clues. An argument over salt and vinegar chips between 2 teen cousins ended with one of the teens being shot and the other facing criminal charges in South Carolina. 19-year-old Ryan Dean Langdale initially reported the shooting of his 17-year-old cousin as an accident, but authorities say forensic evidence contradicted his claims. Langdale now faces charges of attempted murder, using a firearm in a violent crime, and obstructing justice. A death row inmate in Tennessee who asked a federal appeals court to force the state to use an electric chair instead of lethal injection for his execution will have to wait to meet his maker after the court temporarily halted the execution. Edmund Zagorski was sentenced to death in 1984 after he was convicted for the 1983 murders of John Dotson and Jimmy Porter in Robertson County. The federal appeals court will now consider the change of execution method as well as the argument that Zagorski received poor legal representation at his trial. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Thanks, Anthony. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. But I want to talk about Edmund Zagorski right now with our very special guest, Law and Crime trial analyst, Yosha Gunasekera. Yosha, good to see you again. And I want to talk about this case. Is it rare for someone to come forward in the 11th hour, right before their execution, to say, hey, wait, there were problems in my trial?
No, it is not rare. Every attorney who is in this situation is going to fight tooth and nail to avoid their client's execution.
But this was 30 years ago, so why are they bringing up this issue now?
So there's a lot of reasons why these issues are not brought up. Sometimes it's the same attorney who did the trial who does the appeal. So if they're saying this is ineffective counsel, they're effectively throwing themselves under the bus. So sometimes these issues are not raised in a timely manner.
So they're waiting till they get new representation that they could say that.
That's a possibility. That's possibly what happened here, but they're really waiting, trying to buy as much time, hoping that something is going to stay this execution.
Now, it's strange. Is it Tennessee strange that you can choose the manner of your execution? I don't think I've seen that before.
It's very strange. They've actually tried to phase out the electric chair because many people think that
there was a law change.
There was a
right?
law that changed, yeah. So many people think that the electric chair is just very archaic, which is why we've seen a movement towards the lethal injection. So it's very interesting here.
But he's arguing lethal injection is cruel and unusual punishment when it would seem that the electric chair would be much worse.
Again, this is a situation where they are so desperate. They're possibly hoping that the ineffective counsel claim might win out. So they're really doing anything. Time is everything here. It's very dramatic. You see these appeals go to the Supreme Court, and you see Supreme Court clerks running around at midnight. It's really almost like a movie.
Okay, real quick. Best case scenario for Mr. Zagorski, worst case scenario for Mr. Zagorski. What are we working with?
Well, the worst case scenario is that he gets executed, and he gets executed quite soon because the court did not either grant him the electric chair or says, sorry, you have to do lethal injection. That was untimely. Best case scenario is that somehow the ineffective counsel appeal allows him to go back into the system, potentially get a new trial, but again, that could be an untimely claim. So we really have two very different outcomes. What I think is likely to happen, unfortunately, is that he probably will be executed.
Well, it's something to watch, and we will talk more about it here on Law and Crime if there is an update. But we are going to switch gears right now. Before we talk about the Tammy Moore case, there's another situation that we want to talk to you about. Do you remember that we were covering the Daniel Villegas case? This was an interesting one, talking about crimes that occurred back in the day. We had a man who was on trial back for a drive-by shooting back in 1993. He was on trial for the shooting deaths of Armando Mondo Lazo and Bobby England. His first trial ended in a mistrial in 1994. A second trial resulted in a conviction. That conviction was overturned in 2013 when a judge ruled that the police had threatened and intimidated Villegas, the defendant, who was only 16 years old at the time, to get a confession. So he was granted a third trial. A lot of eyeballs were watching this case to see what would ultimately happen. And let me tell you this, when the verdict was handed down, it was dramatic. We have never seen anything like this. So let's play you that verdict right now. Wow, that was incredible. Yosha, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in a courtroom. Have you?
No, and you rarely ever see that because usually judges say no outburst in the courtroom after the verdict is announced, to be mindful for both the victims in the courtroom and then also the defendant. So this is very, very rare, but that was quite the outburst of emotion.
I mean, it's emotions bottled in since 1993. I mean, this is really a long time coming for Mr. Villegas, and we here on Law and Crime had the opportunity to interview him. That's right, Vincent Hill was able to interview Mr. Villegas and his attorney. So let's play some of that interview, and this is where he speaks about what you just saw, his acquittal. Well, clearly him not taking a plea deal worked out in this favor, but Yosha, how many times do you see defendants who are risking it? They're taking a gamble on what a jury will ultimately come back with.
I mean, he made a very brave decision here as a criminal defense attorney in that position. You're generally telling your client to take the plea deal because the risk is so great. But he really stuck by his guns, and he said that he was innocent, and luckily it turned out well for him, but that's not always the case.
Not always the case. Let's play a little bit more of this interview that we were able to have with Mr. Villegas and his attorney. Okay, so we're tracking her movements from her home, traveling around the Myrtle Beach area. At least this is where the phone is being tracked. And at 3:37 a.m., the phone was tracked in the Peachtree Landing area. Now, Yosha, what are we supposed to make of this? I mean, she's making phone calls to seemingly Sydney Moore at the time, including that payphone. She's traveling all around at such a late hour. What do you think?
Right now, I don't think this is the strongest evidence. Hopefully, as the prosecution's case goes on, they'll be able to give it some context, because right now, it's essentially just tracking her movements. Because remember, the Moore's movements, they were not able to track because the Google evidence wasn't there. The Google data wasn't there. So really, all we get is her movements for that night.
So if I'm thinking of reasonable doubt, right, I'm trying to sit on the jury, I'm wondering, but who would she be communicating with? Who would she be trying to see other than Sydney Moore?
But that's speculation, and jurors can't speculate. They can only speculate within reason. So maybe if they're able to provide some other evidence that not only was she communicating with Moore, but Moore was her kidnapper, then you have more of a case. But it's not uncommon. They're not strangers. It could be normal for them to be communicating. Right here, I don't see enough. It's possible that they're going to be able to add some more information to bolster their argument.
At the end of the day, though, we're talking so much about Sydney and Heather, right? How does Tammy fit in? So how do we connect Tammy to this?
I think that becomes even more difficult because, again, we don't know where she was that night. We only have this very strong motive, and I'm hoping that the prosecution has a little bit more than what they're presenting right now, because it's a fairly weak case, in my opinion, thus
far. And I wonder how much they present the strangeness of their relationship, that they're trying to bias jurors into thinking one thing or another. We'll have to see. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. This testimony is very similar to testimony that we're about to play for you from yesterday of Joyce Ayland, who basically, these people that lived in the community had surveillance footage and captured a dark-colored pickup truck driving at the same time when Heather Elvis disappeared. And why does that matter? Because the Moores had a black truck there of their own. Now, Yosha, we're talking about a circumstantial evidence case. You know, how strong is that?
Not seeing the smoking gun yet. Now, if this individual was able to see one of the Moores in the truck, that would be much stronger. But here, all we're seeing is a black truck that could possibly be the Moore's truck. Again, we see the prosecution building their case brick by brick. There still could be a lot more to come, but as it stands, I don't think that this piece of evidence is particularly strong.
Well, let's see. Let's play some of the testimony of Joyce Ayland. And again, in the courtroom right now, it's going completely dark when they show that video, so it's not really great to jump in there at this moment. If it should change, we'll go back live. But let's play the testimony of Joyce Ayland, who's testifying very similar to David Kwon. Okay, just to bring it back, what's happening live, that was testimony from yesterday. If you were to go into the courtroom live, and it's very dark in there because they are showing surveillance footage from David Quant, another person who lived in this Peachtree area. Again, this is we know that the last call made from Heather's phone was at 3:41 a.m. in this Peachtree area. What the jury is seeing right now live in the courtroom is that at 3:41 a.m., the same time, a dark-colored truck is driving around the Peachtree area. And remember, the Moores apparently have a black truck. Again, Yosha, what do you think about this?
So this is what the prosecution is trying to do. They're trying to give you breadcrumbs and then tie it in all together. So while these individuals who are testifying alone might not be a smoking gun, they are trying to tie, for example, the last call was at 3:41. The car was there at 3:41. And they're trying to say these are no longer coincidences. This is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I just wish that the surveillance footage was able to capture something that could connect the truck to the Moores, because really a lot of people drive dark trucks.
Sydney Moore's trial on kidnapping charges, that ended in a mistrial. Now the new jury is being asked not about Sydney Moore, but his wife, who's a second degree of separation in a way, right? She wasn't, it's her husband was having the affair with Heather Elvis. Is that even more likely that we might have a mistrial in this case? I know it's still early, but it's something to think about now.
It's so hard to tell because if they can't connect the person who was directly having the affair, the person who had been calling, because remember, Heather's last call was to Mr. Moorer. So that is significant. Can they really connect this case to Tammy? I think it's going to be difficult, but I do think the motive here is very strong. The things that she did after the disappearance don't necessarily look good for her. The question is the prosecution able to provide adequate evidence to not only say Tammy is kind of a distasteful person, but she's actually a kidnapper?
Do you think, though, the idea of the defense's strategy and saying, well, we had an open relationship and everything was cool, is that a good way to go?
So I think it's going to be contradicted because if you will remember, Tammy said on Facebook her husband cheated on her. And so if you're thinking about an open relationship, you're not thinking necessarily about people cheating. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Really, I think their strongest case is to just attack the evidence or really the lack thereof.
Yeah, again, for all of our viewers just joining us, it's dark in that live courtroom feed right now. But as soon as it lights up, we're going to make sure to go there. That's because they're playing this footage of, this truck, this mysterious truck. So we're playing some testimony right now from Joyce Ayland, who testified yesterday to something very similar. I'm hoping to play a little bit more of her testimony if we have it. If we do, okay, great. So let's play a little bit more of her testimony from yesterday. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. You have this witness on the stand who's testifying to what his surveillance footage captured the night that Heather Elvis went missing. They're seeing this strange dark-colored truck. We know the Moorers drive a black truck. It was in the area around the same time that the last communication from Heather Elvis's phone was made. But Yosha, what is the defense attorney doing right here in the questioning? Can you make some sense of it for us?
Yes, sir. He's trying to attack the surveillance footage itself. So sometimes it's not very clear with the random questions what he's getting at. And again, that's why the closing argument is there. But one of the big points that he brought out was there's a lot of trucks in that neighborhood. So there's a construction site. The truck that is captured on the surveillance footage could be one of anybody's truck in that neighborhood.
Now, you made a good point in the break. So at 3:39 a.m., a dark-colored truck is driving one way on Peachtree. Again, this is the last area where we believe Heather Elvis's phone was struck, because her last call was at 3:41 a.m. in Peachtree. So 3:39 it goes one way, 3:46 it goes back the other way. You're saying in that time frame, what is the jury supposed to believe ultimately happened here with the Moorers and Miss Elvis?
I think what the prosecution is trying to get at is in that very narrow time frame, that's when Mr. Moorer or Miss Moorer or both of them together either killed her or maybe she was already dead, or at that point disposed of the body. I think even though this is not a murder trial, I think that's what the narrative is leading up to. That was her last known contact.
Then again, we don't know who makes a phone call on that cell phone, right? So you have a cell phone, it could be in the hands of someone else making those phone calls.
And also remember, after the 3:41 call, they did trace her cell phone to somewhere else. They said it was a mistake.
Right.
But again, there's a lot of red herrings here, and it's a little confusing to piece together.
It is a little confusing. Well, hopefully we'll make more sense of it right when we come back from our break, because we will be live in the Tammy Moorer trial. Okay, let's analyze how we did on the stand and what we learned. I'm back here with Yosha Gunasekera. What do you think? Did the defense do a good job at poking holes into that testimony about the surveillance footage? I mean, how important really is it?
I think they actually did a very good job here. They got out what they wanted to, which was Mr. Quant didn't see who was in the car. There's a lot of trucks in the neighborhood. That's a very common road for people to take. Again, Mr. Quant is not adding a whole lot except that of his surveillance footage, which the jury already saw. His actual verbal testimony, I think, is less meaningful here.
But the prosecution's trying to build that circumstantial evidence case, that little cake of circumstantial evidence layer by layer. So how do we separate, you know what? Maybe it was their car. If this black pickup truck's driving at the same exact, dark-colored pickup truck's driving at the exact time that she goes missing and around the same time that she makes that last call?
They just, in my opinion, need a little bit more. It's looking incredibly weak at this point. Because remember, even if you can say that's probably their car, that's not going to meet the standard here, the highest standard in the criminal justice system, beyond a reasonable doubt. So right now the prosecution looks like it's grasping at straws, but I don't, this is still the beginning of their case. They're still building brick by brick. This could just be one part of a larger case, and that's what I'm hoping if they're trying to win the case here.
So, a couple of things to note. Right now, they are in a sidebar. That is why we're on break. But and Yosha, one of the weird things about it is we're not talking about a murder case, which is some of the big ones we cover, and evidence of how someone was killed or that they were killed. Here, we're talking about a kidnapping. The elements of that crime, the details of that crime, and trying to prove that crime or a conspiracy to kidnap is radically different and maybe tough to prove, right?
Yeah, it's really tough to prove here, and I think the murder charges that are not actually present in this case, I think that's what's underlying the entire case here. I think the jury is really going to be led to believe, yes, we can maybe only prove the kidnapping as a prosecution, but really she was kidnapped and killed, and I think they're really trying to have the jurors face that reality, that this woman is likely dead. She isn't coming back. Someone needs to be held responsible. But again, they need to have real evidence in order to do that.
This is a live feed into that courtroom. That is Tammy Moore, the defendant herself. We're just waiting for it to start up again. Yosha, the question is, how much is the prosecution going to get those sordid details, about her strange relationship with Sydney Moore? I know that they have a fascination with Disney. It's alleged that she handcuffed him to the bed so he wouldn't leave anymore. I mean, is that trying to taint the jury pool if we get those kind of details out?
So there's going to be a big battle of what can come in and what cannot come in. I mean, things that are directly related to the victim in this case are definitely going to come out. All
right. Well, a lot more to discuss and a lot more to see. We will take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be live. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So this is an interesting development. Grant Fredericks is on the stand, and I apologize for the blocked view. I know that is not ideal. This TV, I don't know what's going on. This TV's blocking, so unfortunately we can't see him. But Grant Fredericks is a familiar name. We covered him multiple times. He testified in the Roy Oliver case, the Ray Tenson case. He also testified in the Sydney Moore trial. So this guy keeps coming back and forth in these different kinds of examinations. So what do you think we're going to get here, Yosha? He is a forensic video analyst. I'm sure he's going to be looking at those surveillance footage, but for what?
Again, he's going to try to break down the surveillance footage and see how he can connect the Moores, or Sydney Moore and Tammy Moore, to that car. So he could be enhancing the video. He could be looking at the license plate. Clearly, we have a very credible witness on the stand. He's been in a variety of these high-profile cases, so it'll be interesting to see how he can make that connection.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you see this a lot. Experts who keep appearing over and over and over again, right?
You do. I mean, as defense attorneys, we do have a lot of witnesses that we do use, but it is actually pretty rare for the same witness to be in so many high-profile cases. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he has to say.
And that becomes an issue of their credibility, right? I mean, yes, we're learning his credentials right now, but that becomes a question that the defense or even the prosecution at times will be like, well, this is your job. You get hired to be an expert.
So that's with any expert. One of the common lines of questioning that we do is, you're getting paid to be here, right? How much are you getting paid by the hour? You were hired for the specific reason of trying to find a connection here. So they're definitely going to try to prove that there is some sort of bias. That always happens with any witness. Whether he's going to face additional scrutiny because of his high-profile trials, it's hard to tell, but it would be easy to, all of that was televised, all of that was aired, so it'd be easy to bring that up.
Yosha, I know our time together is unfortunately coming to an end, so I got to ask you, what more does the prosecution need to do here? Because we talked a lot about a lack of evidence here, especially against Tammy Moore. What do they need to do? What kind of witnesses?
It's what don't they have to do? I mean, they have so much to do here. I really think that what they have presented here is just simply not strong enough. They really haven't connected Tammy in any way to this case. So I think we need to see more about Tammy's motive. Maybe there are other witnesses that she spoke to. Maybe she confessed to someone. Even though this is a circumstantial case, what do other people have to say about this case that can place her at the scene, that can place her in with the victim the night of the crime, because right now we're not seeing any of that. So I think they have a long ways to go.
By the way, was that a double negative? I think it was. What can we not connect?
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I was just trying to make the point.
I was on that journey with you, so don't worry.
They have a lot to do.
Have you ever seen a case, a successful prosecution, a successful conviction for a kidnapping or conspiracy to kidnap when there is no body?
Well, so again, yes. Well, actually, no, I haven't. I haven't seen that, because usually with the kidnapping, the person is still alive and they're able to give firsthand testimony. That's why we usually see the kidnapping and the murder together. So, and then there's a body, and it's much easier to connect. It's very hard to do kidnapping alone when there's no body, there's no victim who's able to testify in court.
Yeah, with a lack of forensic DNA or something else tying to the crime. But maybe it's still early. We have a lot more to see. Now, Yosha, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure having you.
It was great to be here. Thank you so much.
Of course. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to take a break on our end, and when we come back, there is so much more to talk about in the Tammy Moore case, including some of the strange details of their relationship. And of course, I'm talking about Tammy and Sydney. We talked about it a little bit. We'll discuss it a lot more. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime.